Thank you. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. As Commissioner said, my name is Adrian Cortez. I'm a senior hydrologist with the agency. I started in 2010, and this is among our many issues. This is one of the topics that I've been working on that entire time. So, as she alluded to, this is a labor of love. Personally, I love numbers, not so much the torture, but I'm a numbers guy.
Aren't they one and the same?
Yeah, it depends on your perspective. Exactly.
In my experience.
But it is a labor of love. We've done this for a while, and we're hoping that the minute that we're negotiating helps provide tools that Mexico can use to try and move us forward, to push the needle, get us another step. We're going to be going to, here's our agenda. There we go. All right. So our agenda. So we're going to start off with just a quick update on sort of where the system is right now. What is Mexico storage? Where are they in their deliveries? And then how are our dams doing? And then after that, we're going to go into what Commissioner said was to give an update on what is the foundation of the treaty? Why do we implement it the way we do? Right? We've heard a lot of your concerns as stakeholders. It's a 350,000 acre feet every year, no matter what, right? So we're going to sort of show the science behind what's in the treaty, how we got there. And then also at the end, we're going to be giving some near-term reservoir projections based off of the releases that we're currently doing because water levels are so low, which is concern for the farmers, the concern for cities, and a concern for the USIBWC as well. So 5-year cycle deliveries. Mexico is significantly behind. They have a very large shortfall that they need to fix in the next 2 years. We just started the 4th year of the cycle in October, and they are behind. It's the lowest in the last 30 years. That black line right here is this one. This green line was a cycle in the early 2000s that ended then. We're at the bottom. If we don't start seeing rain, or we start seeing a change in how Mexico is doing their deliveries.
Adrian, just
Yes.
take a pause. I think we're having Twitter.
Oh, hey,
Speak louder.
Yeah, you're having a little trouble hearing.
where's the mic?
Where's the mic?
Literally pointed on top of the TV.
Oh, that's a terrible picture.
So maybe, yeah.
All right. How about now?
Just keep talking,
Okay.
louder.
Does it sound better? Can
Can you hear me?
you hear me now?
It's better, Adrian.
Okay, thank you.
So before, let me sit down over here. I do want to talk a little bit about this because one of the things that we've talked about is how the status quo is no longer working. If you see these cycles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is the ones under the red line would be if we receive 350,000 acre feet per year on average to get the 1.75 million acre feet, right? And so as you can see, these are all pretty much consecutive 5-year cycles with the exception of one, which is the 2007 to 2010 cycle, which ended early because it was Hurricane Alex, was it Alex in 2010, right? So there's a lot of frustration that has been building up since the 92-97 cycle, where that one went 92-97, there was a debt, 97, 2002, there was a debt, and then it even carried over into a third cycle, right? And then the one after that was Hurricane Alex, and then here we go again. Repetition of 2 cycles. The one that ended from 2010 to 2015, that ended in debt, and then 2015 and 2020. So the minute that we've been working on all year, all of last year is intended to break that cycle and give Mexico the tools that they need so that they can make deliveries earlier in the cycle. But like I said, I'll talk, and for those of you who want to know more of the details of the minute, we'll leave that to the end of the minute. And I have a presentation that I gave to the Citizens Forum not too long ago. But one of the things that I really like Adrian mentioned, this black line is below all of those cycles. Right? So that means that Mexico is very far behind. They've only delivered about 1 year's worth of water and we're in year 4. And so these are the tools that we're using with Mexico to push delivery of water. Now, Commissioner Resendez is my Mexican counterpart. And we have the US section and we have the Mexican section. And we have one commission. The commission is when the two come together. And she authorized me to say that the commission, that means her and I both, we jointly support that Mexico deliver water and they use the tools that are in the proposed minute and that minute be signed. Okay. So what that says is that publicly, I'm able to say that she's advocating for reducing what right now is a significant amount of water shortage in year 4. You guys hear that, Billy?
Yes, ma'am. We hear you loud and
Okay.
clear.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me get my drink. Okay, so yeah, as Commissioner was saying, we're in unprecedented for territory, right? We have never been this low. The previous cycles in 2015 and 2020, we were a lot higher when we got to the end of it. We are in uncharted territory, so we need to do something different. The dams in Mexico, right? So we split, we update this every day on our website. You can go to our website and see that data and see how much water is in the Mexican dams. So if you need to find that data, it's available. Rio Conchos is 40% full, but they still have quite a bit of water. So that's where, once this minute is signed, we're going to be pushing for Mexico to use those tools to start and try and give you guys some water and then to start addressing that shortfall. Middle tributaries, there's not a lot of storage on there, but again, that's another source of water that we're going to be pushing for them to use at every opportunity. And just to go back again, we want to highlight, right? We all know back here a couple of years ago, or 1 year ago, there was a lot of water, their reservoirs filled, and they could have done something then. We were asking them to do something then. But, you know, they didn't. And that doesn't absolve them of it. That debt could be smaller if they had done something at that time. Here's our dams as they stand right now. Ownerships are there on the left. We have roughly 700,000 acre feet for the United States in both, and about 500,000 acre feet for Mexico. We are not currently at the minimum, but we're pretty darn close. And we're all feeling it. You guys have drought declarations in your cities, I'm sure, for irrigators. Everybody's hurting. Both countries don't have water, right? So it's a shared issue. So that's the update. That's where we stand. So now we're going to talk about why is the treaty the way it is, and why did the IBWC, and that's the US section and the Mexican section, implement it the way we did, right? So we acknowledge you had a lot of inquiries from you guys. We received a letter recently with analysis that was performed by one of the districts and a group of growers. So one of the things that was discussed is that it's an annual obligation of 350,000 acre feet from your perspective. It cannot be a 5-year commitment because there's not enough storage for Mexico to make those deliveries in 1 year. And there's also the issue that Mexico constructed dams, right, since the 44 treaty was. So that letter really led us to go and look at the history and go, all right, how was it negotiated? Why are we doing what we do? But how does that help us today? And the fact is, we're going to be talking about history for the next few minutes. That's not going to give you guys water, right? So we acknowledge that everyone's hurting, especially our Texas users. But what it does help us is that we are bound by the treaty. We have to follow the guide rails in the treaty, and we can't go outside. So the rules that were set in the treaty is all we can do. So understanding how it was developed and how it was implemented is very important, because that's how we argue. We've done it numerous times on the Colorado River, I've been in part of those negotiations where we go, this is what it says, this is what it has to be. And it doesn't matter if it's Mexico making the argument or in the United States. We're doing the same thing in Texas in the Rio Grande. We are bound by the treaty and we can't go outside of it. But knowing the history is how we make our arguments and how we have been successful in a lot of our agreements and moving forward. So for what I'm about to present, there's two primary historical resources that we're citing. One is a technical report that was done by one of the lead local engineers who was negotiating the treaty back in the 40s, an engineer Oribe. And he was with the National Irrigation Commission, which I believe later became CONAWA. And this is his presentation to his government saying, this is what the treaty does, line by line. So he went, this article says this, and this is what it means for Mexico. The other primary source.
Before it was signed.
Yeah, well, yes, he presented it shortly after sign, but it was sort of a summary to his government of how it evolved. That this is how we're going to work it. The other thing is prior to the treaty signing, there was science behind it. You didn't have just politicians getting into a room, writing numbers on a table and going back and forth. They had engineers, they had hydrologists who were doing analysis just like we are today to say, can we make it work? Is the water there? Does the science back what we're signing? So one of the things that was key in the negotiation was the goal. They wanted to split the mainstream of the Rio Grande 50-50, meaning 50% of it was for Mexico, 50% of the was to the United States. And you have to remember that Mexico was far behind at this point in their development. Compared to the US, we had already had a lower Rio Grande system that we were doing agricultural in. But at this time, and we'll show you the numbers in a bit, they weren't doing it. So they wanted to allow for future development in their system, and they had a plan. They knew we were building these dams while we were negotiating the minute, and we had dams we wanted to install and build on other tributaries and other sections. And this is how much land we expect to irrigate with that water. So they had a plan, and they wanted to be able to include that in their analysis. And in order to get to the 50-50, right, they were going to have to develop some of their water that was following on their basin to the United States. So that's where the 1/3 came from. And we'll show you the numbers of how they got there. But that was one of the things they had to do. And there's also the 5-year commitments by Mexico. The Rio Grande is unpredictable. It's always been unpredictable. We know it today. We're in the situation that we are now because we're praying for rain every year, and it's just not coming. The last hurricane we had was from 2010. And I don't think we've ever gone that long without something coming to help us, right? So it's unpredictable. And they recognized that even then. There was going to be years with deficits, and there's going to be years with surplus. So the science, just like we do today, we built a model. And they built a model back then too. It was on a paper spreadsheets. I'm sure they had long reams of paper that they were doing the calculations on. They didn't have calculators. They were doing it all by hand. But just like we do today, they built the model. They had gauging stations as well. So they had equipment out in the river and guys out there, just like we do today, going and seeing how much water is there on the tributaries, on the main stem, and this was in the United States and in Mexico as well. So we had data, they had consumptive use information. Texas knew how much water they were using. Mexico knew what they were using and what they wanted to use in the future. And Mexico wanted to build a system equivalent to what Texas had in the lower Rio Grande, with the end goal being to split the basin in the main stem 50-50. So this is just one example of the math they did. I'm not going to go through it in depth, but they figured out how much water fell in the basin. So that's called natural flow. So you didn't have dams, you didn't have farmers, you didn't have cities. How much water would there be? Then they said, okay, this is how much we want to use. And this wasn't what they were currently using. This was how much they plan to use in the future. This was, if we're going to grow the system, this is our max. And this last column here, that's what they modeled to arrive at the Rio Grande. And if you happen to total all the 6 tributaries and you total everything else in here, That's what shows up. So that's the results of their model back then in the 40s, the 30s, and the 20s, because they ran it multiple times. And those are the numbers. I digitized it, and that's what they came up with. Yes, sir.
Question for you about the number they reserved in the Mexico model for development of an equivalent system to the US system in the Rio Grande. Was that in fact just, pretty clear that it's just future growth that they were anticipating in the valley, or were they possibly accounting for
They accounted for
agriculture in the Chihuahua Desert?
everything, and we'll show that in the
Okay.
table right now, but it was
Thank you.
Rio Conchos Basin, it was the Lower Rio Grande, it was the entire system.
Thank you.
They did have a plan. So that's the results of the data. Nothing surprising. Yes.
It might be worth finding out the years of analysis.
Oh, yes, of course. So what they had was gauge station data from 1900 to 1940. And from that, they used, again, this model that they built to figure out how much would have actually arrived if their system was fully built. And that was the basis for splitting the basin 50-50. So this is the result. Up at the top, you have the allotments to the United States, and you have the allotments to Mexico. Prior to building out the system, you have this section right there. All right, so this is where you have the large system that was already being used by the United States, but Mexico hadn't developed it yet, right? So this is why I have before and after. So before, around in 1944, they had a roughly 500 million acre field. After, they expect only 4 million acre feet to reach the Rio Grande. And the reason it dropped was because they were going to build dams, and they were going to build farms, and they were going to build cities. So this was all part of their analysis back in the 40s. It wasn't a surprise to them. And we're going to show some plots that shows the growth. But it was part of the plan. And I think that's very important for us all to understand, was that it wasn't just happenstance, oh, we're going to build dams, oh, we need more water, we're going to build dams, and things like that. There was some thought behind all of this.
Real quick, just to kind of pause here a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think, just to go real quick through these numbers, I don't know if you want to go through, what was expected.
Yeah.
So this is 1944 current, but within that modeling, they were projecting after 1944, how they were gonna grow in water consumption, right? So why don't you just kind of walk through that?
Yeah, exactly. Good point. So, as Commissioner said, right, this was around the 40s, the system as it stood. This is how I thought it was going to end up. So I'm going to key in on the Mexican tributary inflows, right? So roughly 500,000 acre feet. So what this actually means is that US was getting more water back then. That's good, right? But with our goal of splitting 50-50, right? 51%, 48% Mexico. We got to 385. So the treaty has 350, right? So we negotiate these things. US probably went into the negotiations saying, we want 500. Mexico countered saying, hey, that's our water that we fell in our basin. We ended up at the end of the day at 350. And the science said it would support 350. But you have to remember, this is an average. And we're going to show the variability very soon. But this is an average. It's not an annual commitment in this slide.
See?
The other thing is probably worth highlighting here is the volume for unmeasured tributaries that was projected.
Yeah. So unmeasured tributaries, what that is that within the main stem of the Rio Grande, there's a lot of creeks, arroyos, things that come into the system that we just don't know. And the agreement under the treaty is that anything that's not measured is split 50-50 with each country. So you see roughly here about 1.4 million acre feet of water that we expect to come into the system. This isn't water that's coming off the Conchos or Arroyo de las Vacas or anything like that. This is just trips. They can be in the US, they could be in Mexico. We just assume it's going to be 50-50. The other thing to also call out, right, is US tributary inflow. So that's the Devils, the Pecos, Good Enough Springs, which now flows into Amistad. 2 creeks up in the Presidio area, those were gonna be things that were allotted entirely to the United States. And you see here, the number doesn't change, right? And that part of that is because they were not projecting any sort of growth on those tributaries over time. On the United States, right? So,
And then go back just very quickly. And so the one, talk about how we went from 1.904 to the 1,258.
so that right there is that 700,000 acre, right? So the Mexican tributary flows, they have Rio San Juan, Rio Alamo, and then the 6 tribs that are used for treaty compliance. So it went from 1.9 to 1.3 because they were planning to build. They're gonna build farms, they're gonna build dams. Those are all the things that you guys have called out to us saying, hey, why'd they build a dam in 1980? Well, because they had a plan. It took them a long time to finish and get it all done. Just like it took us 20 years to get Amistad and Falcon built, but it was part of the plan. Talking about consumptive use, right? This is again, their use. Back then, as I said, Mexico was not using a lot of water. So this upper table is just what was on the main stem of the Rio Grande. They're using 143,000 acre feet. US at that time was using 1.1 million. They didn't have farms, they didn't have systems, they were barely using the water that was coming through. This is the lower Rio Grande system they built. That was the plan. They're gonna go from 143,000, they're gonna add 1 million acre feet of water. And they built it, right? We see it today, they take that water in Fountainville to us canal and it goes. There was also some growth projected for the United States, 1.1 to 1.8. I don't believe the US actually used that much, but at the time of negotiations, that's what their negotiators were saying. We're gonna grow our system too. And this is the increase, right? So between the past and what was projected, US said they were gonna increase by 700,000 acre feet. Mexico said we're gonna increase by 1.3. If you look at, this is the main stem of the Rio Grande and its tributaries.
So this includes conchos.
No. This is just what's
The Rio
coming
Grande.
into the Rio Grande.
Okay,
This one down here, that's when we add in the Conchos, Escondido, San Diego, Salado, all the tributaries, as well as their tributaries for the San Juan and Alamo, because they're going to build systems there too. So again, we are going to grow 1.951 for the United States to 2.6 million acre feet. Mexico, when you start adding in the Conchos, they were going to increase their entire system by 2 million acre feet. That's a lot of water, right? They almost doubled it, at least double. So they had plans to build. They're going to build. Yes, sir.
I was curious, when you use the term future, is that correspond to the certain time period?
So it was the future that they projected. So in 1944, they said, we're gonna add this many irrigated acres. And we're gonna build an irrigation system this big. So this is, in terms of consumptive use, this was their max for a full allotment to their farmers. So this is what they expected. If the water was super wet, maybe we just had a hurricane, built up those dams. That's about what they were expecting they were going to be using during those years. So it's not really over a certain time. It's just, once we're done, we plan to use this much water.
Question,
Yes, sir.
did that increase include the 350,000 acre feet that was negotiated to be delivered to the United States?
Yes, sir.
On top of the 1.483 million?
so this is
No.
consumptive use. This is just what they're projecting their farmers to use. And then you'll see how they calculated that they could meet the 350,000.
You can go back a slide.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can.
It's in that.
Okay, so the analysis was right. So it was twofold, right? This is how much water is in the basin. And then the next step was how much are we using? And then it was how much do we want to use? So that's why we went from 508 to 385. So when they were negotiating the treaty, Mexico, right, they signed this thing. They made a commitment to deliver a certain amount of water. And their engineers, their scientists, their politicians, they had to prove to their government, can we be successful? So after they did all the math, they said, yeah, there's gonna be on average, there's gonna be 385,000 acre feet. We think we can do this. And at least through the eighties, they were fairly successful, right? Then things started to change. Drying systems, maybe it's a change in water use, various factors, right? But for many decades, they were doing really, really good.
It's fair to say too, that at that point in 1944, the South Texas irrigation system was pretty close to what it is now.
Mhm.
And the one in Mexico was nowhere near
Right.
what it is now. So
Right.
that was a concern. I went back and read a lot of State Department communications on it, and that was a concern that even the US had, because there was so much use going on in the valley. And like if Hidalgo County was going full blast, Matamoros and Brownsville couldn't get their pickups into, there wasn't enough water to get it out. And there were irrigation districts here that had 48-inch pumps going. And so when you look at it, that's the difference is ours was all built out pretty much before 1944 and theirs is built out after 19.
And I think that's what the consumptive use slide shows, right?
Yeah. They were gonna be building out their system and just looking at the data that we have, right? It hasn't been supportive, right? Since the nineties, we've been failing more often than we've been successful. And that's one of the drivers for the concern and why we've been trying to get something better going. Because as I said, we're bound by the treaty. So at the end of the day, Mexico still has a commitment that they have to meet. They agreed to that in the treaty and we expect them to do it.
And show there how the Mexico, no, next one. How Mexico's consumptive use, which goes to your point too, in 1944, they only had 143,000 acre feet of consumptive use, but in 1944, they projected when they did all this hydraulic analysis that they were gonna get up to 1.483 million acre feet.
So they were adding 1.3 million acre feet. That's a lot more. Yes, sir.
So if I understand correctly, we should be able to getting a fairly accurate understanding of the consumptive use today in Mexico, consumptive use today in Texas. We could pretty fairly compare where are we at today versus where were the projections in 1944, and we could compare the delta and see, did we in fact meet the expectations at that time? Does this treaty serve those expectations, or was there in fact a different plan that's really developed? Is the reality different than that expectation?
We have some stuff.
Yeah, we're gonna start showing some of that. We don't know how much in detail we can give because our time is limited. We have a lot of topics, but we want to start alluding to that information. And we want to also note, this isn't the last time you're gonna see us. Our commissioner has asked us to make this a more regular thing, to give you updates on how the basin is going, how our negotiations are going, any topics or questions you guys have for us. It'd be similar in concept to the citizens forums that we have where sometimes our guys present, but it would be more focused on the water. So that Delbert and I, or one of us, can come up here and have these conversations and have more routine communications with everyone. Okay, so going back to that 385, right? So that's how Mexico figured out they were gonna make that commitment. The dams weren't built, so they didn't know how big they were exactly gonna be. But they did do an analysis. How often are we going to be successful? How often are they going to fail? Or not fail, but how often? How often did they think they were going to fail? And what was the variability, right? Because we just gave you an average number, which isn't indicative of the highly variable system that is Rio Grande. It is unpredictable, as we all know, unfortunately. We don't have the snowpack like some of the other bigger rivers from the other parts of the country. So what they did was they said, okay, we don't have reservoirs, but we can do a simple analysis. We're gonna take the first 5 years from 1900 to 1904 and see how much that totals, right? Because the US made a commitment to deliver 1.75 million acre feet. And then they go to the next set of 5 years, go 1901 to 1905, and then 1902 to 1906. And it's just a way to produce data. But it does give them an idea of risk. How often are they going to be short and how often are they going to fail at the end of 5 years? So this is them trying to figure out risk roughly 70 years ago. So you, again, using that projected data, what they thought was going to be arriving at the Rio Grande from the 6 tributaries, that's that blue bar chart that you're seeing. The orange is the times that they did not deliver the 350,000 acre feet in that year. So again, Rio Grande is highly variable. At the very start, you have 3 years that are below, it goes, shoots back up, we have a good wet year, and it goes back below, goes up, right? So this alludes to and points to and supports, right, that this isn't an annual commitment because the negotiators in the United States and Mexico were using this same science. These are the numbers they use. And it showed if it was 350,000 acre feet, they were very rarely ever going to be able to meet that, right? So why would Mexico sign on to that deal? And that's why you have the 5-year average, was that Mexico looked at it and said, okay, every 5 years, we think we can get that 1.75 million acre feet, but annual, it's just not going to happen. And this is the data that they had. This was what our negotiators saw. This is what their negotiators saw, right? So this wasn't just done in a vacuum.
Can you explain the red line?
Yes. So the red line there is the 3 times 350,000 acres, right? So if we get 1/3 and Mexico has to deliver 350, they have to deliver twice of that to Mexico, right? So it'd be 3 times 350. So that's that red line. That's how much water would have to arrive every year instead of the Rio Grande to get the United States 350,000 acre feet. Which all,
What are the years on that?
this is from 1900 to 1944.
And if you average the tall blue bars and everything together, does it work out to be the 1,050,000 over that 20 years?
385,000.
It works out to 385 because we were doing what the US obligation is, but you are correct. It'd be a little bit more than million. 3 times 385 is what it would come out to. Figure out where it was. Okay. So this is what they're looking at. There was science behind the treaty, and this is right. We signed the treaty, and then it came to the engineers of the commission to figure out how are we going to implement it. And it was probably the same guys who helped negotiate and do these deals. So they had the knowledge at that time to say, this is how we're going to do it. And that's why, so for the past 7 years, we've implemented it the way we did. And it'd be the same reason that the State Department has made the determinations it did, saying that we are doing it appropriately. Going back to my totaling analysis, correct? So this was, how often are they not going to meet the 5-year cycle? So when are they not going to get that 1050 over 5 years? There's a lot of blues in there, but sometimes there is an orange. There's sets of orange where they said, okay, we're going to go to the end of 5 years and we're going to have a debt. And their engineer Oribe in his report to his Congress said, okay, we recognize that there's going to be times where we're going to fail. So how do we fix it, right? And in that, even then they said, well, that 2/3 water, some of it is going to have to go to Mexico or to the United States to help relieve that debt. And that's why we have 234 is it was based off that science. It said, if we're going to be failing, we either need to release water or get it from somewhere. And the 2/3 was the option that he was telling his government. And that's why we're also trying to get in this minute to make 234 more usable, right? So there's limitations on when Mexico can use 234. And for those that don't know, minute 234 allows Mexico to do reservoir transfers. So that's to give water in the international reservoirs, Amasalas and Falcon, to the United States to pay debts, or they can give some of their 2/3 water, right? So this is water that they own and they're allotted and say, we're going to change that ratio to 50-50. Or if it's really bad, all 100% goes to the United States. And we've done that. We did that in the previous cycle to try to quickly pay off that debt. That's what Mexico did. So it's a tool that we've used. And now we're pushing Mexico in this new agreement for them to use it as soon as it's signed, really.
In the first 5-year cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's worth pointing out, talking minute 234, we can only use it after a 5-year cycle ends in a day.
And that's what their engineer was testifying to, was that if we end in a debt, then we can do these things, right? So that's probably what sort of drove the negotiation for 234. But it's not working anymore, as we know. We're going 15 years now where we've been having a hard time. Mexico's been behind the whole time almost, and we need new tools to be successful.
Can you just say what the years are on the bottom?
Again, so this is the same period from 1900 to 1944. So that's the data they had when they were negotiating the treaty. So that's what they were doing. When
So they
they
stipulated like if they had been 5-year cycles from then.
And it's just a way to build data. I coincidentally did the same thing by, not accident, but without knowledge that they did this too. So that at least validated my thoughts when I did it, but
And that's data from Mexico. That's their data. It's
Yes.
from the negotiations.
yes, sir. This was how much they expected to run. And we understand this is a Mexican perspective, but you also have to remember that they were trying to testify or tell their government, this is why we can be successful, and this is why the treaty as a whole works for Mexico to its benefit. So this is 1954 to 2020. So this is what actually happened, right? So they did that all that analysis, and then IBWC actually started doing 5-year cycle accounting in 1954, and we've been doing it ever since. So that blue line is how much water has been arriving at the main stem over that period. The horizontal blue line that's dashed, that's that 1050 that we were talking about earlier. So anytime that we're below that blue line, Mexico did not deliver the required amount. When they're above, they did. Again, you see, this is why it's an average. This section back here before the red line looks very familiar to the other graph that I showed, right? It's highly variable. There's ups and downs, and there's periods of wet and dry. We call out 1992 because in our analysis, and we did some math behind it, there's a change. There's a distinct difference between the data before 1992 and a distinct difference after. And it doesn't take anyone to really notice it, but right, you have your drought in the 90s. It's very, very low. You have 3 years that are above, drops back to almost nothing, right? And that's the driver of the situation we're in today, right? That's why we've gone 15 years back to back, debts and shortages and shortfalls. It doesn't matter what you call it, but that's what's leading to the issues that we're seeing today, right? The variability has changed. You get a peak, but it's also very, very low most of the time. And there can be a lot of reasons for that, right? We know the 90s was a drought. Did you seen, and we're going to go into it right now, says that they may have made some changes in how they do stuff. But it doesn't solve the main issue today, is that they're 2 years behind so far, and everyone's trading, especially the users in Texas. So summary, right? They expected to be short sometimes. They couldn't, the data did not support an annual commitment of 350,000 acre feet. So that's why we didn't implement it that way. And that's why the treaty says it's a 5-year average. Because Mexico thought we'll be successful every 5 years. And that was the best way for them to do it, and agreed to what was in the treaty. And again, the projections show that there could be a debt at the end of 5 years. So they said, okay, how do we address that? And the 2/3 was one of those options. So,
But that's been in 234, isn't it?
yes,
The 2/3 option. That wasn't in the treaty.
no.
Hey, sorry, real quick. This is Dante Galeazzi from TIP on the line. I don't know that the treaty necessarily shows it the way you're saying. I think what the data supported is that they couldn't make all the payments in a single year clearly, but that they could make up their shortage in an annual payment over a 5-year period. I think that's more what the data showed. Not that they could pay it all back at the 5th year, that over the course of a 5-year period, if there was a shortage in year 1 or year 2, by year 5, there would have been made up additional water. And so they could pay that back. Not that they could hold back every single year and then make that payment in the 5th year. I think that's what the data shows. And that's what you just showed us. Not that a single delivery at year 5 on whatever 365 times 5 is. I think that's more what that was showing. Right? No. The graph before that. See, what you're showing us here is the total of all 5 years in that cycle, not what got delivered on the final day of year 5. Is that correct?
So correct, Dante. And I think, I don't think we're saying differently. What you're saying is that definitely one of the things I want you to talk about it right now, and I don't know if you have it later in your presentation, is that you are correct. They are thinking they're going to deliver. This is the 5-year cycle, but that some 5 years are going to be short and they can make it up in the next 5 years. That's what this one shows. What the annual one shows is that, yes, you are correct. There are deliveries made every year. They may not be 350, right? But there are deliveries being made every year, which is this slide, right? And at the end, it should add up to an average, a total of 1.75 million acre feet. But what the next one shows, go to the next one, shows is that they felt that they were going to be 5-year periods where they were not going to make up, because these are 5-year periods. Okay.
They're overlapping periods.
Oh, there's some overlapping periods. Okay.
Yeah, they're all overlapping periods, but Dr. Hinera, completely agree with you. But again, and this is where I'm saying I disagree a bit with the way this is being phrased. The data supports that Mexico should be paying a little bit, or should be paying every year, and by a complete 5th year, they will have made it up, because let's say year 1 and year 2, just like you're seeing, like let's
Right.
look at 1900 to 1905. Year
Right.
1 made it all. 1, 2, and 3, they wouldn't have made it, but by year 4, they would have had more than enough water. And so had they been paying every year, bam, we'd have been there. But that's not
right. No, without a doubt, we agree that they did not anticipate 5 consecutive 5-year cycles of having shortfalls. We totally agree with that. I think one of the things, Adrian, I don't know if you have it later in your presentation, is the role of the reservoirs and the role of wild water. Is the way they had kind of done that analysis, that the reservoirs were considered as part of it, and that they felt that they would still be able to fill their reservoirs, and whatever overflowed would make it to the river. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so that just goes back to this table, right? So that 385, which was the average of the other data that you said, is what they called wild water, which was what they expected to arrive at the Rio Grande, while also allowing for them to use
To store.
and build projects and things like that.
Right.
So that's the wild water.
But in the last 5 cycles, they have, see the way, and that's one of the things that I've shared with this group repeatedly, is one of the things we're trying to change, which is in this next minute, is for them not to just be delivering what they call wild water, water that flows over the dams, okay? Flows over the weir of the dams, because the above conservation capacity, which has been traditionally how they've been delivering water to us. And so part of that is, in the minute, it does reference Mexico's need to open their reservoirs and release water to actually make up, because this slide is basically based on wild water, what they're calling wild water, water that's not captured and stored.
Yeah, and I think to the point that was just made is you're 100% correct. And it also points to the fact that Mexico needs to be proactive, right? We've seen over the past that they, at least during the 90s and 2000s for certain, they were waiting to the end of the 5 years, hoping for something to come, right? And what we're saying is that that's not going to work anymore. They need to be proactive. And just as you said, when those blue bars are over that line, that water needs to also be used to help resolve the debt before. So in the year that it's being done. So more
The
proactive.
information that we gave you, the tables that we gave you, did not indicate that we expected 350,000 acre feet a year.
Right.
What they showed is that if they make deliveries like they have been in this cycle, because of their limitation of their storage, their debt builds up to a point where
Right.
even if they pull the drain plug in
Right.
every reservoir they have, they can't fulfill their obligations of the 350,000 average, and they're gonna end the 5-year cycle in a big deficit. That was all that was supposed to show, was that nobody anticipated them waiting until
Right.
the last day of a 5-year cycle to pay back the debt, that they had to chip away at it as they got, when they were way behind in years 1, 2, and 3, like we are now. There needed to be some releases or something,
Right.
or a change in the 2/3, 1/3 to account for that.
Right,
Mhm.
right, and that's what the minutes, they have to be releases from the reservoir. Because as all of the deliveries that were made in year 3 was wild water, that was it,
All of the deliveries since 1944.
Exactly.
have been wild water.
pretty much, pretty much. I think somebody told me that they did open the reservoir once.
Not for very long.
Well, yeah, right, but we can't continue operating like that, right? And so, yes, Steve, Yes.
The last thing that you made right there, is spot on, that thing to happen, but State Department or your commission, what is the pressure you
Right.
can do to do that? Because they're not gonna do it out of goodness of their heart. How can you all force them to go ahead? Not you.
Right.
Well, you.
So- if I were the water fairy, reservoir fairy, I could wave my wand. And I don't mean it kiddingly.
Get a hammer.
I need a hammer, which my hammer is, diplomacy has 2 ways: incentives or punitive measures. On the Colorado River, incentives are funding that Bureau of Reclamation has to provide conservation efforts to Mexico to leave water in the United States. We don't have that tool here, right? So that would be an incentive. That could be, and so in this minute, there is a provision to start building that. I have been in conversations with the Bureau of Reclamation to see if that could be a possibility, so that we can get water in year 1, so that we can get water in year 2, and and so that's part of that minute, okay? Punitive measures will be war, trade sanctions, and I definitely don't have those tools, right? Weapons is another one, but I don't have that either. But as an incentive, right? For some countries, they sell, or the USA sells weapons to some countries, right? But the whole point is that me, IBWC, as the head of this commission, though, that is the tool that I have, okay? It does not mean others don't have other tools in him, right? Dante, does that kind of, I mean, we're in agreement. I guess I want you to walk away with that perception.
I appreciate the explanation. I get what you're saying, but I'm going to continue to be in disagreement here, in the sense that if IBWC and the stakeholders can all agree that looking at the data, it was never intended for Mexico to pay everything at the end of day 5, year 5, or
Right.
at the end of year 5, why is it still being allowed to happen? So I don't know that we are in agreement.
So, no, I think we are in agreement. It was based on this data, it wasn't intended for you to pay in year 5. And I don't think, there's always water that's running in, coming in.
Yeah.
It's just not these volumes that we're seeing in 1900 and 1901 and these early years where there was a lot more rain, where there was a lot more what we call wild water. Yes, Greg, can you raise your
Yes, ma'am.
voice?
It seems like the issue now is how Mexico is managing their water, because
Correct.
what you reflected, and one of the comment that you said, which is kind of, I don't necessarily agree with, Adrian, is that we're all hurting. We know what the volumes of water usage that is behind the dam.
Right,
Depict what our current status is, and you depict what their current status is, but if you were to go back and look at, just back in June, they used in 4 months, 1.4 million acre feet of water in just 4 months. The way they're managing their water right now behind the dam is so that they can never spill the water. We would do the same thing, and we do the same thing. We want to make sure that we're not spilling, we're not putting any water over Brownsville drops in excess of what we have to, right? Well, that's the problem right now, is the way that they're managing their program.
Right.
They will never get back to what their usual usage.
right,
And I think that what's important for us to actually depict here from the United States standpoint is what is the actual consumption versus what the plan was? Because right now we have justified the.
Okay,
We'll get-
let's get there.
Mexico's consumption.
Yeah, no, we have both.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're getting there. But you are right, Craig. It's how they've been managing it all this time. And like I've said, it's huge for them to tell us that they've never opened their reservoirs for us, and for it to be made public that way.
Yeah.
Okay?
Understand, our message has been I've been talking about it since 2013, when we started doing a lot of this analysis based off the natural flow data sets that they were providing us, was that yes, there's gonna be years where there's drought, but what we've seen is that the US is being unfairly harmed, right?
Yes.
We are not sharing in the
Right.
loss. They're getting more water than we are, and that needs to be, if there's not enough water to go around, that's gonna happen. We know that Rio Grande is variable, but everyone needs to be treated fairly,
That
including.
was the sole purpose of the treaty, is to ensure that that did not happen. And that is the problem right now.
That is the problem. That is correct.
And that's the message we've been telling them for the past decade at this point. And the tools that we're trying to do and the modeling that Delbert is doing points to that point, right? But we're not quite there on the modeling. Mexico has to also socialize it with their users with the concept of, I need to use less because there's not enough. The amount of water that we're working with has changed. It doesn't support the historical use anymore. And for the US to be fairly treated, they're gonna have to make some changes in their water practices as well. So,
Let's just add a little bit more on the model. It's under development, but those are some of the key performance metrics we're looking at. One, what percentage of naturalized inflow is being delivered to the United States compared to pre-1990s? Is it a fair reduction? We're looking at what percentage of their water rate are farmers in both countries getting. Is that being fairly distributed? So we share your concern. These are key metrics we have in the model to evaluate different policy scenarios.
Right, and that's information that we use with Mexico so that they can take back to their leadership. And that's the information that I still have not filtrated too high up yet, because you guys are seeing the first cut. You're seeing, even before, my leadership has seen the first cut. You guys are seeing the first cut because I want input. I want to be able to advocate based on what you guys are seeing on here.
yeah, and to your point, saying that when I said share, I was just talking about right now the reservoirs are low. And we're gonna be talking about that more in depth in the later slides, after this historical stuff, but that was the basic mind, is that the reservoirs are in a very dire situation, and it's unlikely to improve unless we get some rain or Mexico makes a change and starts releasing water.
Dante had.
Dante.
Yeah, yeah, sorry, I guess I'm going to jump ahead just a wee bit here because I know we are coming up on time. Essentially, I'll read the question. What I don't understand is if the data and the spirit of the treaty and IBWC all agree that Mexico was supposed to pay something annually, and that over a course of 5 years of this something, they would achieve the commitment, how can folks like the State Department still say Mexico's in compliance with the treaty when they're clearly not providing water annually and instead waiting until the last day of the 5th year to comply?
Because we true up at the 5-year mark, unfortunately. You want to?
Yeah, I'll say, so.
Yeah. True up is not a term in the agreement, and nor did we see anywhere in the treaty where it said, oh, doesn't matter what happened between 1 to 5, as long as you're good at 5 is it. I mean, that's not what the treaty says. And again, I realize, Dr. Henner, you know this, but I'm going to go back to it. The treaty says annual payments. The treaty says over 5 years, that's how you've got to hit it. It seems like what we keep hearing is, oh, don't worry about that first part of the treaty. That doesn't mean anything. We're just worried about this 5-year thing. That doesn't really seem like we're all reading the same treaty, I guess.
Okay, so we have a couple of comments.
I'm just asking, is it simply the fact that the treaty does say that, it's just that we've never defined what extraordinary drought means?
So, no, that's another, yes. And so, is this an extraordinary drought? Is 1992 forward extraordinary drought? I don't know. And I'm not an expert on what defines a drought. And so definitely, that is my concern, honestly. That is my concern. Right, Delbert, were you gonna say something?
I just wanted clarification. So Dante, you made the comment that they need to pay throughout the cycle, and water is moving in when it's there, whenever they deliver it. So there is payments being made in that sense. But I want to get a better sense of what you consider payments over 5 years, because they don't ever just give us zero. And I just wanted to get a better sense of what it means to you.
I would say at this point, you're probably picking over blades of grass on the lawn. But, I mean, let's go back to that data that they used where they reviewed 43 years prior to agreeing to the treaty. I would very strongly indicate that is exactly what the United States of America expected Mexico to be delivering. No, the other one?
Because the treaty does allow for a 5-year cycle to end with a deficit, right? Yeah. The treaty does allow for that. It's in there.
Yes, it allows.
Technology may not be there in that 5-year cycle.
Okay. Yes. Again, you're jumping right to the end. That's what I'm saying here. Everyone's jumping right to the end. The treaty says annual payments. It doesn't, and I think everybody can agree, we didn't expect them to give us, 1 acre foot and everyone say, yep, you guys made your annual payment, right? I think we can all be of agreement in that. And it says that after 5 years, they can end with a deficit. But what we are seeing, and I notice we haven't gotten to some of these other graphs, but what we are not seeing these levels of water payments from Mexico. And
These low levels, right, and we agree.
Mexico does have the capability to provide these levels of water payments based on the reservoir systems that we clearly identified at the front part of this meeting. So I would say that is where the disagreement lies.
I think we're all saying the same thing, but I'll agree to disagree with you on you disagreeing with me. But no, seriously, these are discussions that we have with Mexico where we look at their water levels and we say, you will have water to give. I think one question we have not, and one point we have not advocated for is the parity in sharing the drought, right? And that was your point, Craig, is that, and I think this is allowing us now to move forward and say, our farmers are taking these cuts, your farmers are not taking equivalent cuts. Okay.
We haven't defined what extraordinary drought is, but we know when they pick up 2.3 million acre feet in 6 weeks, that's not extraordinary drought. They're no longer an extraordinary drought. And we are, and that's where the reciprocity should come in.
Right. And that's the idea with all of this. Okay.
But somebody's got to push for that, and that's the state